Yes, hi, it's a pleasure to be here. And I think by now we are more delayed than the space launch system, so I'll try to stick to my 15 minutes. I will try to share my screen here as well. Let's see where this works. So I hope you can see my screen, and I'll make it full screen as well, so it's easier for you to see it. Okay, so I'm supposed to speak about our future, humanity's future on the moon and Mars in 15 minutes. Okay, I hope our future will be more exciting than this, that it will only take 15 minutes, but I will try. I'm convinced our future will be more exciting than being able to describe in 15 minutes. But I want to actually start at the end point, and I'm really happy that Fabrizio, at the start of the session, he was mentioning science fiction, because basically half my presentation is science fiction, because I'm just a huge science fiction fan, and I think at least some of the science fiction out there can give us pointers to our future, to plausible futures of Earth. So I'm not going to dwell on this page here because Fabrizio has done a very good job introducing myself. As he said, my main job is investing in space companies. We just announced an investment in Space Perspective, a stratospheric balloon space tourism company. And yes, I wrote this book, and yes, I host the Space Business podcast, and I hope some of you will look it up and may enjoy it. Okay, I promised science fiction, so here we are. Several perspectives of science fiction. This is a really famous one. This is from the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. If you haven't seen it, please leave this conference and go watch the movie now. It's a tremendous movie. This is the moon base at Clavius Crater, as described in 2001. A little bit more recent, this is from last year, from the Netflix series Away, which actually describes an astronaut's journey to, or a team of astronauts' journey to Mars. But they actually make a stop on the moon, and then they launch from the moon, which is actually much easier than launching from Earth because of the lower gravity that we already have heard about. So this space kind of looks boring, so let's not dwell too much on this base. Another example of a moon base here is from I think it's also 2019 movie with Brad Pitt, Ad Astra. And there's a couple of things I want you to notice here. I mean, A, it's a much bigger base, it looks much more exciting. But somewhere in the center, off to the left, you notice a yellow sign, and this is low resolution here, I apologize. But this yellow sign is actually a DHL as in the mail company sign. And then in the center off to the right, you can actually see a neon sign of a cowboy. It's a very famous cowboy in the US. It's called Vegas Vic, which is typically used, to advertise bars or nightclubs. So the reason I want to point this out is because this is a clear sort of indication of commercial activity or like elements of regular human life on this moon base. It's not like a pure scientific base or anything. And this is something we'll come back to. Okay, moving on to the next one. So we're moving on to Mars. This is from the movie Total Recall, the 1990s original movie. Please don't watch the remake. It's terrible. This is the 1990s original with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It takes place on Mars. And again, a couple of things I want you to notice here. One on the left side picture, on the lower left, you have, if you look carefully, you see one of these giant mining equipment excavators. So clearly there's like mining of space resources going on. On the right-hand side, you see basically some people dining in a restaurant. So again, it's sort of an indication of relatively normal human life, and they seem to be in some sort of like probably domed habitat to protect them. I couldn't find any good stills of the scenes, but actually in the same movie, you also have like the depiction of basically like a nightlife, almost a red light district, which seems to be located in a lava tube, which we already heard about lava tubes. So that kind of makes sense. And then also in the people who appear in this nightlife district, there's a lot of mutants. And the movie then explains that they're mutant because they're basically born on Mars, and they mutated because they were living in cheap habitation domes where there was insufficient radiation protection. So again, things we already have heard about. Last science fiction example, this is one of my favorite TV series. This is The Expanse. Again, if you haven't seen it, I really highly indicate it, partly because I think a lot of the things it depicts are entirely plausible. There's an alien element to it, which I'm not sure about, but except the alien element, I think many elements are plausible. This is actually not on the moon or Mars, this is on Ceres, so this is the largest body in the asteroid belt. And this is Ceres Station, and if you look at it, it basically looks like a shopping street. I mean, there's shops, there's restaurants. If you watch the series, you'll see there's police, there are gangsters, there are corrupt politicians. It's basically a human society. And there's many elements, interesting elements to mention in the series, but I mentioned just one. So Ceres naturally has almost no gravity, but then I'm not sure the series, but the book behind the series explains that they actually spun up, they made the whole asteroid rotate to generate 0.3 g of, so roughly 1/3 of Earth gravity. But of course, it's still much less than Earth. So the people who live there and are born there, they have a different physique than the humans who live on Earth. They're kind of like leaner and taller because they live with less gravity on a constant basis. Okay, so those are some visions from science fiction. But of course, the key question now is, how do we get from this here above, which is basically the moon and Mars, they're wastelands, right? There's nothing there. How do we get to this like fully functioning human societies that we have seen in some of these science fiction examples? So far, we have not gotten there, right? What we have done so far is sometimes called almost in a semi-derogatory way, flags and footsteps missions. Of course, the Apollo missions, the human landings on the moon, 6 total missions, successful missions, right? 7 attempted. Hugely successful missions, fantastic scientific achievements. But those guys, none of them stayed more than 75 hours on the surface. And they brought absolutely everything from Earth. The habitat was the lunar module. So this obviously didn't come anywhere close to what we want to achieve if we want to achieve this sort of future we've seen in the science fiction examples. So again, the question is, how can we get there? And I think there's possibly some sort of logical sequence here. So we start with the flags and footsteps, professional astronauts. A next step might be research stations, like we see already on Earth, like in the middle on the top, you have that's the South Pole Station, the Emerson Scott South Pole Station. That's literally located at a geographic South Pole. And interesting, it almost looks like something you could find on another planet. It's like this domed structure. That's not the only building there. There's more regular looking buildings there. But this one, I think, looks like it could be on the moon or Mars or somewhere. On the bottom, that is, again, from science fiction. You may recognize it. It's from the movie The Martian. And again, it's depicted basically as an astronaut, professional scientists only type arrangement. And that seems to be sort of a reasonable intermediate step to assume. And then, of course, we would go on to the ideal goal that people like Elon Musk imagine, that we have a self-sustaining human society or settlement in places like the Mars where normal people can go, people who are not just astronauts, who are not professional scientists. But so again, what is necessary for us to reach these various steps? So for the flags and footsteps, it's basically the capacity to go there, transportation. And we've just heard about it in Maria's presentation. I think she's done a very good job, and I probably can't add much. But I think we're actually doing a quite good job already, and it's really exciting to see how many people are working on those technologies. So you may have seen just a few days ago, this is obviously an unmanned mission, but still it's a fantastic achievement. The Chinese Chang'e 5 lander, so the Long March 5 rocket, went to the moon, released the Chang'e 5 lander. The Chang'e 5 lander actually took lunar samples, actually some of the samples far below the surface, and will very shortly return to Earth. So fantastic technology, fantastic achievement, but it's unmanned. On the right-hand side, a very ambitious vehicle, probably most of you know it, that's SpaceX's Starship, which is SpaceX's next generation spacecraft, which is intended to do a lot of things. It's intended to deploy many satellites on Earth. It's intended to go to the moon, but it is intended to go to Mars as well. And if all goes well, we will see a test flight of this prototype. The prototype in this picture is what's called SN8, to an altitude of 15 kilometers. And it'll be just thrilling to watch that as one small step on the long way to the journey to Mars. Okay, so for the flex and footstep transports, and I think transport capacity, and I think we're doing well there. Then, okay, if we want to have research stations in places like the moon or Mars, and this is now a real objective, right? If you look at the Artemis program, the American Artemis program, one of the declared objectives is to have a permanent human presence, so some sort of a research station by the end of the 2020s. What we need for that is basically the capacity of supporting life in a sustained way, so people can actually spend longer time there than the Apollo astronauts spent there, and basic infrastructure. Again, Maria has mentioned already most of the parts here, so we can go quickly through these. Just some numbers here between the moon and Mars. I think it's always good to remember these. And just the moon by itself, it's on average almost 400,000 kilometers away. Just to keep that in mind, that's like 1,000 times further away than the International Space Station. Okay, the difficult part is actually getting out of the gravity well of Earth, but still, it's 1,000 times further away. You take a few days to travel there. Mars is a completely different animal. Mars, at its closest approach, is about 55 million kilometers. And at the furthest point, and it's on the other side of the sun, it's over 400 million kilometers away. So the best case scenario to take 6 months, and that happens only about every 26 months, that window. That's also so far away that you start getting noticeable delay in communications. So to the moon is 1.5 seconds. So, a lot of things are still feasible, like regular human communications, probably even some types of remote operation. For Mars, you're looking at anywhere between 3 to 22 minutes. So that's significant delay. You really need autonomous capacities. Then a lot of things Maria's already mentioned. Basically, both of these places are highly hostile places. No breathing air, water in the form of ice, which you have to gain it from the ice first. No food around, you'd have to grow it there. Not really friendly temperatures. They're basically hard vacuums, both of them. Lots of radiation. Maria gave some more precise numbers. I just said lots because it's basically the radiation is really bad for you, and much less gravity than on Earth. But beyond that, again, as Maria's mentioned, we need some basic infrastructure. We need energy. That's probably the most important. So now there's some plans, for example, for mini nuclear plants on the moon. We need communications, navigations, habitats. I also want to point out medical, and that's actually the reason I put this picture here. The picture on the right, that is Russian scientist.
En dan of in de habitat medico. Hey, medico!
Some background noise here, if you can mute that, please. So the picture on the right is a Russian scientist in the 1960s called Rogozov, and he was at the Russian Antarctic, well, the Soviet, I guess, Antarctic station in the winter of '61. And being a trained physician, he self-diagnosed at some point in time with appendicitis. And Antarctica in the winter, for all purposes, might as well be on the moon. And so he had to basically self-operate. So he he extracted his own appendix without anesthetics.
Die lesbische astronauten, die cheated.
So you can ask the
bankrekening van
Alexander, could you please mute your mic?
Slepen 200.000
microphone.
En dat werd dus berekend als de eerste echte misdaad.
I think now it's gone. Okay, so again, in case this didn't come across, the picture on the right is a Russian scientist who self-operated. He surgically removed his own appendix during the Antarctic winter on the Soviet research station, because medical help was just too far away, and that of course is going to be a similar situation on the moon or Mars, where we have to make sure there's medical attention available. Okay, just as a reminder here, and I want to try to strike an optimistic note throughout this presentation, past exploration on Earth also hasn't been easy. It wasn't easy. If you look back to the Spanish, the Portuguese exploring other parts of our Earth, or what I see, the picture you see here on the upper right, that's the British arriving in Botany Bay, right, what today is Sydney in Australia. There was a journey of several months. So this was like going to Mars. And there was no fast communications available, right? I mean, basically, if you send any message, that also took several months, right? There was no telegraph or anything back then. There was unknown wildlife, like in Australia, there were like spiders and snakes around that could kill you that people didn't know. On the lower right, you have one picture of the Shackleton expedition to Antarctica at the beginning of the 20th century. Again, several months journey time, extreme conditions, basically as cold as, well, certainly Mars, arguably as some regions of the moon. So this wasn't easy, but people went to these places. Okay, moving on. So we talked about how to go from flags to footsteps to research stations, where we put in place the basic life support and the basic infrastructure that Maria has already mentioned. But of course, what we want to get to is a self-sustaining settlement. And what we need there, we need some reason to stay besides research, because otherwise we'll just end up with Antarctic research stations, and that could be really exciting from a science point of view, but it's not going to give us a human society. So let me start with an anti-example, because I was just picking on Australians, right? Many of you may know that actually at least New South Wales, one of the key Australian states where Sydney is located, actually started out as a British penal colony. And science fiction writers or screenwriters have had that idea. So if you have watched the movie Man in Black 3, it starts basically with a scene at what they call the Lunar maximum security prison on the moon. I call it an anti-example because I really hope that that's not the use case we find. I hope we find better use cases. So in that spirit, what could be some use cases to go to the moon and Mars? And again, some of the previous speakers have mentioned that. Well, science, obviously, and many different kinds of science, whether that's geology or maybe doing radio astronomy on the far side of the moon. testing, using, for example, the moon as a test bed for going to Mars, right? Because it is closer by and it's easier to get to and leave from. It's like 3 days instead of 6 months. The moon as a staging location for other locations like Mars. So that's what we've seen in the Netflix series Away. Natural resources, again, that has already been mentioned. So we have things like water ice on the moon and also other elements. Space tourism, of course, at the moment, extremely expensive, but we're seeing the start of that. So in the picture on the left, you see that's Yusaku Maezawa. He's a Japanese internet billionaire, and he booked a circumlunar flight. He's not going to touch down, this time at least, on Starship with SpaceX. Nobody knows the price has not been disclosed, but he probably paid something north of $500 million for that. But it's the start of space tourism. Entertainment. There was something that I think was just in the news fairly recently that you see on the right, a picture on the right, that there's plans for having a remote control car race on the moon. And there might be other examples for that. There might be sports events and like, making special use of the lower gravity. And of course, if you talk about Mars, the reason Elon Musk wants to go there is to make humanity multiplanetary, which for him is basically diversification, a risk reduction exercise, just in case the Earth gets hit again by some sort of dangerous asteroid or something else that could basically extinguish life on Earth. And there could be other reasons, and that's really the main question that we have to solve. Is like why can we go there? Why do we have to go there? What can make us stay there? And that's something that really I want to encourage you to think about, because we need creative minds to think about why we should go there and why we should take humanity to space. And I swear I didn't agree this with Ilaria, but she mentioned something that I also always mention, that we have had humans, and we have at the moment in the ISS humans in space. We have never had humanity in space. Humanity in space is, when, as Ilaria mentioned, when you have art in space, when we have a theater production in space, when we have book reading in space, when it's things like when I could take my pet to space. At the extreme, of course, it will be when we can reproduce, when we can have families in space, and I don't think we've nearly scratched the surface on doing the research on that. So I think those things we still all have to think about, and I would encourage all of you to think about what could make us stay in space and build societies there. Think about how exciting a time is to be alive. I mean, how exciting would it have been retrospectively to be alive when the emigration started to the US and the founding of the US, and being a pioneer, one of the first people who went out to California and the gold rush and things like that. Well, now we're talking about going off Earth. How much more exciting is that? So really, I'd encourage you to think about it, and hopefully, 20, 30, 40 years, we'll have the first settlements in these places. So that's all from myself. Thank you.